You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast, and I have Steven Sashen. He's the head of Xero Shoes. The website is Xero Shoes.com. So, Steven, thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So, what's the why shoes and why Xero Shoes? What led you in the direction to make shoes?
Oh gosh, the personal thing or the political thing? Personally, it was an accident. I had just been, like most human beings, wearing regular shoes. I got back into sprinting actually about 12 years ago after a 30-year break, and asked the other runners in the group that I was with, what shoes do I get? And they pointed me to a classic running shoe, bunch of padding, arch support, motion control, pointed toe box. And I was just getting injured all the time. And one day, a friend of mine who's a world champion cross country runner said, "Why don't you try taking off those crazy ass shoes and see what you learn?" And what I learned from getting out of them was why I was getting injured, because it was a form related problem that I just couldn't feel in those shoes. And more importantly, I learned how to get rid of those injuries by adapting my form, because doing it wrong hurt and doing it right felt good actually. And to make a very long story very short, that led me somehow into having a footwear company there's a certain irony that this is the word future is in the title of this podcast, because we've just gone back in time. If you think about the first 10,000 years that we know human beings have been making footwear, the first 9,950 of them, so 99.95% of the time, shoes were just something to protect your foot and something to hold that protection onto your foot. And that's basically what we're doing. The modern athletic shoe is the intervention, and there's just no evidence that it's helpful in any way. And there's actually a lot of evidence that it might, in fact, be harmful.
Yeah, I want to talk about that and get into it a lot. I've podcasted with thousands of people, literally, and there's two camps I get to see people fall into. One is the, we'll science the shit out of this type thing, like from the
right.
movie, and with technology we can overcome everything, and all that. And then there's another camp which I'm moving more and more towards, that what's natural and what's coming from nature is far more intelligent than we could ever be. And so the more we can allow nature to do its job with our help, the better.
Well, I'm going to say that I'm leaning in the latter direction as well, but I'm going to say we've also had to science the shit out of this. Now, the irony here is that no one ever says to the big shoe companies, "Hey, where's your proof for anything that you say?" By the way, they have none. But they ask us. It's like, well, where's the proof that, using your feet naturally is better for you? It's like, you're kidding me, right? But we've literally, not we, but the community of people who believes in natural movement has literally had to do research to prove something as simple as, if you can use your foot, it can get stronger. And if you immobilize it, it gets weaker. What a shock. And, and there's
That's
just
ridiculous.
tons of that. And there's actually research on modern shoes, especially the ones with a lot of padding, that the way those things are sold is, hey, you have all this incredible padding to protect you from the shock of running. And the research couldn't be more clear that that padding does not protect you at all. And in fact, more padding often leads to more shock going through directly into your joints, because, for a number of reasons. One of them goes back to the natural thing. You have more nerve endings in the soles of your feet than anywhere but your fingertips and your lips. So you're clearly supposed to feel things. You're supposed to use them. And when your brain can't feel anything from your feet, it tries to land harder just to get some information about what the hell's going on.
Yeah, I think what's happening is, if you provide padding, for instance, in a shoe, you're not getting that feedback between,
Correct.
Your senome, your senses, and the surface you're walking or running or whatever on. And your body adapts. It's constantly adapting.
Yep.
Instead of I know we're getting into genetics, but random genetic mutation to me is complete BS. Your body's always adapting constantly. Like you walk outside, it's bright out, your pupils shrink.
Right.
You're in a dark room, so same thing with anything, walking, hearing, smelling.
Well, and with your feet, it's actually really interesting because there's a bunch of nervous impulses that don't even make it up to your brain. It's a reflex arc that goes from your feet, actually from your legs in general, just to the base of your spine and right back down, because we're supposed to respond to the ground quickly. And if you're making it so you can't feel things, then you can't respond well, and that can lead to balance problems. And what that can lead to is what happened to my dad a few years ago, where he just shuffled as he walked from wearing big shoes all his life. And he tripped over a little ledge in a hallway in a kind of a shopping mall, fell down, broke his hip, and was dead 2 weeks later. And, and this is a very common phenomenon. Like every year and a half, there's some research that comes out where someone does some variation of taking some vibrator and putting it on people's feet and ankles, especially elderly people or people with Parkinson's or other sort of neurosensory problems. And they go, hey, look, it made their problems get worse, or sorry, not worse, made their problems get better. And I've written numerous blog posts in response saying, yeah, or you could just take off your damn shoes and go for a walk outside and then use your feet. And we have hundreds and hundreds of people who've done that and reported the same benefits as, the magic vibrating insoles.
I can tell you, I have very flat feet and they're very wide. And literally until about a month ago, I hated walking without shoes. I'd wear them constantly because it was awkward for me to walk. And I went on a trip to Europe with my family and it was going to be really hot. So I decided to get sandals. And I now own a pair of your Xero shoes. But before that, I had like these Rockport sandals. And I did it to keep cooler. And I was worried, I got my normal shoes with me. What if it hurts when I walk them?
Right.
So we did a ton of walking and my feet adapted and they must have strengthened a lot over the few weeks we were gone and walking every day. Because now that's all I wear is these sandals and I feel so much better.
Yeah.
And I tried walking with no shoes and I can do it now and it doesn't feel like unwieldy and a big problem.
Yeah.
It's the first time in my life and I'm in my 40s. So I'm experiencing this change like right now and it's great.
Oh, I had lifelong comedy level flat feet, like family joke level flat feet. And when I got out of shoes, I developed some arches in my feet. The entire shape of my foot changed. It used to be that when I would get out of a pool or a hot tub, my footprint looked like a paddle, and now it looks like a footprint. And the shape of my foot looks like a foot. Now, I'm not making any promises about how people's feet will change shape. In fact, arch height is primarily genetic, but the important thing is not arch height. The important thing is strength. And that's what you're describing, is that when you use your feet, they can get stronger. There's, again, research from Sarah Ridge at BYU that showed people who just walk in a truly minimalist shoe, and I'm going to highlight that point and come back to it. People who walk in a truly minimalist shoe, their feet strengthen as much over, I think it was 8 weeks, as they did for people who were in a actual foot strengthening exercise program. And when I say truly minimalist shoe, there's only a couple of brands who are doing that. Xero Shoes is one. A company out of the UK called Vivo Barefoot is another. The 5-finger shoes, most but not all of them, qualify as well. And this is a characterization that was developed by Dr. Irene Davis at Harvard. But most of the major companies that make a shoe that they call minimalist or barefoot, from New Balance, from Nike, from Merrell, et cetera, Irene refers to those as partial minimalist shoes. I've accused her of being politically correct and said, I think the real term should be fake minimalist. And the reason is simply that they, usually have too much padding. So again, you can't feel the ground as much. And B, the shape is usually not quite foot shaped enough, not enough to handle a wide toe box or wide foot like you have or like I have. And Merrill used to actually call me on a regular basis and go, hey, we have a new version of one of these shoes coming out. Would you like to try a pair? I said, well, I can't get them on my feet because they're too narrow across the instep, right? They'd say, well, do you want a pair? I said, I'm just going to sell it on eBay if you send it, right? They went, well, do you want a pair? It's like, yeah, okay, sure. So made a few bucks that year.
That's funny. So what are the parts of a shoe that, are trying to help us supposedly, but unintentionally hurt us?
All of
go
them.
through different parts of the shoe.
All of them. Well, here's how it all began. So 50 years-ish ago, some doctors who were in the same building that Nike was in, or as they were just getting started, recommended to Bill Bowerman that they make a higher-heeled padded running shoe because Bowerman complained that some runners were coming to him and getting Achilles tendonitis. And so these doctors said, oh, well, clearly their Achilles have shortened from wearing higher heeled dress shoes. So make a higher heeled running shoe to accommodate that. And it'll take pressure off their Achilles. Let me cut to the end of the story where one of these doctors was at a track meet with a friend of mine. And my friend said, so what do you think about this phenomenon that this idea you came up with has become the ubiquitous design in footwear? And this doctor said, yeah, it was the biggest mistake we ever made. And so if you think about it, elevating your heel does two things. First, it messes with your posture because it kind of tips you forward and then you have to lean back or arch your back to adjust for that. The second thing it does is that when you're running, if you're running in bare feet, if you're running in bare feet, your heel will barely miss the ground as as your foot comes in contact with the ground. So you end up landing on your midfoot or your forefoot, but your heel just is, half an inch off the ground as it's passing over the ground. If you add a 3/4 inch heel to your shoe, then suddenly you're going to end up hitting the heel before your foot would normally hit the ground. And it's also your heel's going to end up also landing in front of your body instead of having your foot landing underneath your body. So that does a couple things. The first thing it does is when your foot lands in front of your body when you're running, it's like putting on the brakes. You're decelerating and then you have to accelerate again by driving your leg in a somewhat unnatural movement pattern. The other thing it does when you land on your heel is it sends a shock of force straight up through your joints. It doesn't use the muscles, ligaments, and tendons as the springs and shock absorbers they're designed to be. The third thing that it does, your heel is a ball, so it's unstable. And so after they did this elevated heel, that's when they started having to do motion control for shoes because they were making people unstable. And that's when the shoe companies started saying, oh, well, pronation, see, that's a problem and we need to correct that. Oh, I don't want to point out the obvious, but they created the problem. And pronation is not inherently a problem as part of the natural spring mechanism of your lower leg. So you land on your heel, you're putting on the brakes, you're putting more force through your body, you're becoming unstable. You're also, when you land that way, by the time your foot comes fully in contact with the ground, it's flat. And that's not the strong position for your foot. Think about doing a bicep curl. Your arm is the weakest when it's straight, and it's the strongest when it's a little past 90 degrees, 90-degree bend in the elbow. Similarly, with your foot, when it's flat, it's weak, and when you're engaging the arch, it's actually strong. And when you land on your heel and your foot rolls into a flat position, you're trying to have your foot be strong when it's in a weak position, like doing a bicep curl with your arm straight. And so then they had to build in arch support so that you weren't going to try and use your arch when you couldn't really use it and put excessive strain in your arch, which can lead to things like plantar fasciitis. So that just one little thing of let's make a padded, elevated heel leads to almost every problem that you can see that people are having right now. And some people say, well, but what if I land on my forefoot or my midfoot in a padded shoe? And the answer is that still doesn't work because you're not then able to let your heel drop all the way and really use your Achilles tendon as the real spring that it's built to be. And by shortening just that natural movement pattern, that can actually lead to Achilles problems as well. So the crazy thing, and I'll stop ranting in a second, is that footwear is primarily an industry driven by copying other people. Someone sells something and it sells well, regardless of whether it's useful or not, then all the other shoe companies just try to jump on that bandwagon and either change everything they're doing to fit whatever they think the new trend is, or just to capitalize on the trend temporarily and then go back to whatever they were doing before that. And so the fact that almost every shoe that you can buy looks basically the same now after 50 years, is just because it was just a bunch of copycats. And then they told such a compelling but inaccurate story to people for so long that everyone now believes that story to be true, and these companies can't change.
Well, the transition, I've faced it myself, transition from wearing a completely, padded shoe or supported shoe to Xero is rough. Is there any way that you see a need? What if you make a shoe that has padding everywhere except it's a drop heel? Would that be a stepping stone back towards eventually no shoes at all?
Not really. The idea of what you're referring to is what people call a transition shoe. So if you've been in a shoe, I'm exaggerating, with a 2-inch heel, then maybe you switch to a 1-inch heel, then a 1/2-inch heel, then a 1/4-inch heel. It doesn't work that way. So all you need to do is, that's kind of like saying you're going to go to the gym and you want to get strong, but you're going to start by bench pressing a 1/2 pound, then 1 pound, then 2 pounds, then 4 pounds. No, you start with a weight that's the right weight for you, and you just do a little bit. You do 1 set of 8 reps, for example, and then you just do that till you're comfortable, and then you add 2 sets. And when you can do 2 sets of 8 reps, then you bump it up to try and go to 10 reps. And when you can do that, and then you add more weight, for example. So same idea with the transition. You basically want to go, if you can go barefoot, that's ideal. Otherwise, something like Xero Shoes, which will be the next best thing. And you just, if you need to, you just do a little bit over time until you're starting to build up that strength. But the transition thing doesn't work because you're still messing with the entire biomechanical process.
Well, again, what do you do though? It is a stumbling block. I mean, not everyone's willing to, be patient and go slow, and they may think, oh, this is not working that much.
Well, I mean, this is a really interesting point. You're right. And I'm going to say this in an obnoxious way. Yeah, people suck. And so what I mean is, some people are going, well, I don't want to do that. It's like, okay, so when you get older, do you want to fall down, break your hip and die? And I'm not suggesting obviously that everyone will do that, but that's kind of like saying if you break your arm and once you get out of the cast and your arm is atrophied, it's like, well, I don't want to spend time having to do rehab to get my arm strong again. Sure, you can make that choice, but it's stupid. And so it's a similar thing. Sure, it could take you a little bit of time to get used to using your body naturally again, but then you have a body that can support you comfortably and healthily and enjoyably for the rest of your life. Why wouldn't you take the small amount of time that's required to make that happen? If you want to see people who walk, run, hike without problems, fundamentally into their 70s, 80s, and beyond, just go to any place where they mostly don't wear shoes. And that's what you see. And there's no reason why you can't rebuild that strength, rebuild those neural impulses and regain your balance to a certain extent, if not entirely. And why wouldn't you? And if you don't want to, if you're going to say you're, just too lazy to do it, great, keep buying crappy shoes. I'm not going to talk you out of it. It's just the logic for that. I find it utterly mind blowing when someone says, well, look, here's a variation of that I find really incredible. I met a friend of mine at dinner one day, or I bumped into a friend of mine at dinner. I said, how are you doing? Are you still running? She says, no, I'm going to get plantar fasciitis surgery next week. And I checked her out and I said, you don't need plantar fasciitis surgery. She says, what? I said, can you just, elevate on your toes, like just stand and just lift up onto your toes, raise your heels? She goes, yeah, I can do that. I said, does that hurt? She says, no. I said, well, if you had real plantar fasciitis, that would be excruciating. I said, can you just bounce back and forth while staying on your toes from, foot to foot? She goes, yeah, I can do that. I said, does that hurt? She goes, no. I said, well, if you had real plantar fasciitis, you wouldn't be able to do that either. I said, now, while you're just bouncing back and forth from foot to foot, lean forward a little bit and see what happens. And she basically starts running. And I said, does that hurt? And she goes, no. I said, you haven't been able to run for how long? She goes, like 6 months. I said, and I just showed you that you can run without pain in 60 seconds. So why are you getting the surgery? And she looked at me kind of like I was crazy. And you can't see me on a podcast, but I'm 5'5", got, shoulder length, dark curly hair. I said, just because I look like this doesn't mean I know less than your doctor. I was a pre-med. I spent a lot of time with medical people and working with researchers. But I assure you, your doctor doesn't know anything about natural movement. He's just a surgeon. That's his job, is to diagnose things that require surgery. And she went and had the surgery anyway, despite the fact that I showed her she didn't need it. And I find that both amazing, stunning, and sad.
Yeah, it's true. So what's the minimal thing needed? A shoe. I mean, you don't want to step on a nail, obviously. You don't want to rip the skin off the bottom of your foot. But.
Yeah. So the easiest answer is nothing. You can go barefoot totally fine. This worry that people have that you just kind of expressed of, I'm going to step on a nail or I'm going to step in dog shit. It's like, well, when's the last time you did either of those? But literally, it's like, when's the last time you did either of those? And most people say either never or it's been 20 years. It's like, well, then why are you going to start now? I mean, I'll tell you what actually happens when you start walking around barefoot, which is how I spend most of my time, frankly, is you pay attention to where you put your feet. I mean, you just
barefoot, but not pregnant.
Yeah, exactly. Not in the kitchen.
You should wear a shirt that says that, barefoot, but not pregnant.
It's a great line.
You probably would get in trouble though.
We definitely would. So, if you're barefoot, you'll pay attention to where you put your feet. When you feel the ground, you start paying attention to where you put your feet. So the barest thing you need, again, is based on what you're going to be walking on or in and what your current level of conditioning is, let's say, our thinnest sandal has 4 millimeters of rubber and some laces that you use to wrap it around your ankle and your foot. Pardon me. Pretty much the same way that people have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. That's really all you need. We've had people hike the Appalachian Trail. We've had people climb mountains in just that simple sandal. But if you're not ready for that, then we have one that's a little bit thicker. And then we have two that are a little bit thicker, but still give you that natural movement and still let you get feedback from the ground. And what you might discover over time is something similar to what happened for me, where when I first started doing this 12 years ago, certain kinds of surfaces like the gravel that was in around my driveway, I couldn't walk on. It was very painful. And within a year or so, I could walk on that without a problem. And it wasn't because I had developed thick skin. Pardon me, I got the hiccups all of a sudden. I hadn't developed thick skin. I hadn't gotten calluses. I hadn't gotten numb to things. Quite the opposite. My feet became more flexible and more responsive. And I was just walking in a way where if I was putting weight on something and it was unpleasant, I would step off of it or jump off of it as necessary. And that doesn't mean you're never going to get injured. That's of course not a promise that anybody can make, but the number of the kinds of things that people are worried about happen so infrequently compared to the fact that 50% of all runners and 80% of all marathoners get injured every year with something that can put them out for weeks or months at a time. So, which do you want? The occasional something that heals quickly, or the pretty frequent something that can make you stop running or walking or hiking entirely because, every time you do it, you get hurt.
I mean, the problem is, though, look at us culturally. No shoes, no service. Like you walk in with no shoes to places, they say, oh, it's unsanitary, and they'll kick you out.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, there's a couple things. I've never been kicked out of anywhere. The only place I've ever even gotten hassled was, ironically, at Whole Foods, where they said, you got to have shoes on. I said, how come? They said, well, for safety. I said, there's a dog walking around here in bare feet. Why doesn't the dog need to be kicked out? Or my line is, Whole Foods, where they get mad if you're in bare feet, but it's okay if you're breastfeeding your dog. So the no shoes, no service, you can have a policy where that's just what your policy is. But it's really fun to ask people why they have that policy, because they'll usually say, well, it's a health code violation. It's not true. There's no city or state in the country, pardon me, that prevents you as a patron from being barefoot in any establishment. The establishment may decide that that's a policy, but there's no health code violation. There's no, excuse me, I don't know what's going on with my throat. There's no health code issue. Sorry, say again.
You need water for a minute, by the way. No problem.
Yeah, I don't think it would help, but I don't have any near me. But thank you for your concern. Suffice it to say, I've walked into a number of places where they say you have to wear shoes, and I say why, and they go, well, it's a health code violation. And I pull out a letter from the Secretary of State for the state of Colorado that says there's nothing in the books that says there's any health issue with walking in bare feet. And if people say it's
you actually have a letter?
Yeah. Yeah, if there's a,
what you should do. What you should do is when you sell shoes. I don't know if you do it, but why don't you see if you can get a letter from each state and include that with the shoes for the purchase?
I think it's a group called the Society for Barefoot Living that has most of them published. And
the other thing I love, reprint it with permission. That would be a cool thing.
Yeah, no, well, it's obviously not something that's copywritten or anything, so it's an interesting idea. Of course, the joke is if they're buying my shoes, they're not necessarily walking around barefoot, but a lot of people who do get our products do end up spending more time barefoot, because once they get used to feeling things, it's kind of natural to go out and do it. Because look, it feels good. Just remember being a kid, and on a hot summer day, you go outside, you kick off your shoes, and you feel the grass or the sand or the water or the dirt underneath your feet. I mean, it feels good for a reason. We evolved to respond to when things feel good because they're good for us. And that's what happens. But I've shown that letter to people, and they've said, well, it's unsanitary. I go, well, I'm not eating with my feet. How is it any more unsanitary for you if I'm in here in my bare feet than with my shoes? It's just, it's people don't understand. The one place, this is actually a really interesting one. I used to, when I was going to airports, after I would take off my shoes to go through security, I would just keep them off. And then I got to the point where I just never put them on, and I just didn't have them on to begin with. And I was getting on a Southwest flight, I think. And the guy at the gate says, you have to put on shoes to get on the plane. I said, no, actually you don't. He goes, well, you do. It's a federal law. I said, no, it's actually not a federal law. He goes, well, it's my law. I said, yeah, that's not a thing. You can't do that. And he insisted. And so I had my sandals with me. I threw them on, and I got down the jetway. And as I'm walking down the jetway, some other people went, take them off. And so I took off my sandals, and then the gate guy had to walk down the jetway, and he sees me and he got really mad. So I put them back on. And as soon as I got on the plane, I took them off. But it's interesting for airplanes, when you buy a ticket, you're actually buying a contract, and the contract is that the airline is agreeing to give you transportation, and they can withdraw that contract for any reason. And some of the airlines explicitly say, including being in bare feet or having bare feet. Now, this was written into their contracts in the 60s. And if you ask any of the airlines why that was ever written in or why it still exists, you'll never find an answer. But my suspicion is that they wrote it in when there's just a bunch of hippies who were on airplanes. And that was an era when people got dressed up to get on airplanes, and they just never took it out. But there's no reason for it. It causes no problem.
I think when we haven't, what's important is this stems from my thoughts about it too. Like culturally, I felt another reason why I always wanted to wear shoes is I felt lazy. I felt unprotected. I felt like people would look down on me if I wore no shoes. Like only bums would have no shoes, or beach bums. And I think culturally that's held by a lot of people, that view, if you have no shoes, you're lazy and you're not working hard, and you're just I don't know, you're not a good person. I honestly think people feel like that a lot.
Well, it's funny. If you're in Hawaii, that's not what people think. If you're at any beach town, that's not what people think. It really is location dependent. So there is a cultural component that has some other gradations. And it's funny, when I go into Costco now, if I'm ever wearing my shoes, which I'll do for either because I'm wearing them for any number of reasons, including just testing out a new pair, or I just got off the track, or whatever it is I'm doing. I've been stopped a few times lately where people in the store say to me, is everything okay? You're wearing shoes. So, so there's definitely a cultural something component to what people think it means when you're in bare feet. And, whatever. I mean, I'm not saying you have to walk around in bare feet. I'm saying it's a whole lot of fun, and you can do it in more places than you think, and it's not illegal. And if you've never been in a grocery store on a hot summer day and stood in the produce section where the floor is nice and cold, and when the mister goes off, it's like, it's the adult version of running through a sprinkler. It's the best.
Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, if you're selling these shoes, what kinds of anecdotes have you heard from customers that were surprising to you, either in a good or bad way?
Nothing really surprising, because we know what letting your body do what's natural does. And so we have thousands of testimonials from people who are, first of all, they just say, oh my God, these are so comfortable because they're wide enough for your feet and they're flexible enough for your feet, and they let you feel, and they don't mess with your posture, all those things. And then it's just so many people saying, I'm running, walking, hiking, dancing, or any number of things that better than I've ever done before. Of course, again, I'm not making any promises for anybody, but if you just look at the reviews on our site, you'll see all those. My favorite though was backing up to the magic vibrating insole thing, was I got an email from a guy who was 82 years old, who said he was actually looking for the magic vibrating insoles, but instead found my blog post. And since he couldn't find the magic vibrating insoles, decided to put my theory that just going out and walking outside in bare feet would be helpful. He decided to put that to a test. And he said, that was 2 weeks ago, and I just threw away my walker. And the thing that keeps Lena, my wife, and I doing this, because running a business is really hard, especially one growing as fast as ours, is that we do get emails from people every day who tell us how just these things have changed their lives. And whether it's just because they finally have comfortable footwear, or that it's actually made a difference being able to use your body naturally. And that's what keeps us going. We just got one today. It was like a very long email about a guy who had all these foot and ankle problems, and nothing was working. And he stumbled on our stuff, pun intended. And now he's running, walking, hiking, which he hadn't been able to do in years.
What about, I don't know, you keep throwing this stuff at you. What about getting parasites to the skin of your foot? or are you cutting
Well,
your foot or that kind of stuff?
yeah. So two things. One, most people who are listening to this, I'm assuming, are in a developed country where the odds of that happening is really, 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 really tiny. And where the kind of environments where that happens, you pretty much know. I mean, if you're in a third world country where people poop in the streets, and I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't poop in the streets, but if you're somewhere like that, dangerous. If you're around livestock and where there's livestock excrement, same thing. If it's a bunch of standing water and it's the kind of thing that just doesn't look good, what are you walking through that anyway? But again, that's why we make footwear. Is there are times where being barefoot is not ideal. And even look, I'm a competitive sprinter. When I'm at full speed, I need to be in a pair of shoes because otherwise at 23 miles an hour, I'd rip the crap out of my feet on a Mondo track surface. If you are hiking certain kinds of terrain, we have a trail running and hiking shoe that's awesome for that because it just gives you better traction than you would have if you were in bare feet. So there are certain circumstances where the appropriate footwear is great, but even with that footwear, you still want to have a natural shape so it doesn't squeeze your toes together and elevate your heel, a flexible sole so your foot can bend naturally, and as much ground feedback as you can get away with in that situation.
Okay. So what if someone has, I don't know, let's say like neuropathy, or if they're older?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any recommendations for them versus a younger person?
Yeah, these are great questions. So for something like diabetic neuropathy, one of the challenges, of course, is that you can't feel things very well. The solution that's typically offered is just bundle up your feet so you don't have to ever feel anything and you're totally safe. The problem, of course, again, is it's use it or lose it, and you're now in a situation where you can't use it, and that just makes things worse, or can make things worse. There's a number of studies that are suggesting that, again, natural movement is a better option whenever you can do that, because when you move your feet, you're increasing circulation. There's a product that we sell on our website called the Neboso insole, developed by
I've tried them.
Yeah, it's a surgical podiatrist named Emily Splickle who developed this thing, and basically it's just got a bunch of little bumps on it, is the best way of putting it, and they add extra stimulation to your foot compared to especially just being in shoes. And there's some research that I saw out of Australia that people with diabetic neuropathy were helped by something similar to that. So again, when in doubt, start with what's natural and try to make the interventions as small as humanly possible or as small as practically possible. And so for elderly people, there's a friend of mine who's developed an app to help elderly people regain their balance. And we're going to become, it seems, the official footwear for that app because, again, when you can feel things and use your feet naturally, then that's what allows you to have better balance, or what can allow that. I'm trying to think of how to describe this. Think about if I asked you to drop and do 20 push-ups, would you rather do that on the floor or on a memory foam mattress?
The floor would be easier because the memory foam, you'd sink in, it'd be really tough.
Right. So same thing happens when you have shoes with all this extra padding, is it actually makes you unstable in a way that's not beneficial because you're not really adapting properly. You're having to adjust rather than frankly, what it takes to balance is tiny, tiny, tiny little micro movements. And when you have too much padding, you're making bigger movements to make try to make those same adjustments, but they're not as fast. They're not as reflexive. And so it's harder to actually balance on something that's unstable. And all foam is, not only is it unstable, but the moment you start using it, it starts breaking down. And so if your posture isn't good to begin with, which it won't be if you're elevating your heel, it's going to get worse as the foam breaks down in uneven patterns.
Yeah, it makes sense. Any advice for people that, again, they're gun shy and they want to take, I guess, literally dip their toe in to, if you could do such a thing, to no shoes, like what would you recommend?
Well, that's the entire reason that we have a business is if you want to go barefoot, just again, start small. And if you want to have a little bit of protection while you're experimenting with that, then pick up any of our products. And we have a page that helps you select which product is right for you with kind of a barefoot index. And you can pick something that's either more barefoot or less barefoot. Doesn't really matter. It's totally up to you. Just knowing if you pick one that's a little less barefoot, after you get used to that, you might want to try something a little more barefoot. But even our quote less barefoot stuff is closer to barefoot than pretty much any product from any major company.
What about the material itself? I mean, I've learned a little bit about earthing, and traditional shoes seem to I don't know, electrically isolate you from the earth? Any currency there, or do you not agree?
In short, well, for people who believe in that, I'm about to get them upset, and it's not my intention, but there's no there for it. Let's just do a simple. Here's how do I want to put this? If we want to examine a belief, what we need to do is what the first thing one should do is look for counterfactuals. Look for something that's the opposite and see what that looks like. So, for example, the idea that footwear has insulated us from the ground and that's caused all manner of problems. Well, just go and take a look at places where they don't wear footwear and see if those people are devoid of those problems. And you will find that that is not the case. What they're devoid of is the problems that people who wear footwear have, like plantar fasciitis and Achilles tendonitis and hammer toes and bunions and things like that. But everything else, there's not a there for it. Or another thing I can say, this whole idea about being electrically connected to the ground. Your skin is actually an incredible insulator. Actually, I'll say two things. Leather shoes do not connect you to the ground. They'd have to be soaking wet, and then it's the water that's actually providing the electrical connectivity, not the leather. Leather, people don't remember, because most people don't know, was used as an insulator for early electronics. And so leather doesn't help. The idea that you need to be electrically connected to the ground or all hell's going to break loose is also problematic. But again, your skin is an insulator. Your skin can develop a positive or negative charge, and that's on purpose, because otherwise that charge would be going through your body. So think of it this way. Over 99% of all people who get struck by lightning have no problem, because what happens is the charge goes around their body and then grounds into the earth. 100% of all trees that get struck by lightning explode.
Okay.
Just something to ponder.
Well, but again, in looking at the material that the shoe is made, so forget about earthing.
Sure.
Rubber versus leather versus, have you looked at all the interaction of the foot and the sweat from the foot?
Oh, yeah, of course.
All that and the material you walk on. How about there? What have you found there? Absolutely.
It has nothing to do with the specific material per se. In other words, leather is not better than rubber. Rubber is not better than leather. What you need, again, for natural movement is something that's going to be flexible, and you can get that with almost any kind of material. What you also want to do is be attentive to what kind of performance characteristics you need. So leather is not a great product for a performance shoe, like a running shoe, because it just abrades too quickly. It'll just wear out really fast. Rubber is just better for that, and certain kinds of rubber. So most running shoes, they say you need to replace them every 300 to 500 miles. And they say that because the rubber is designed to wear out at about the same time that the midsole foam wears out. They do this on purpose. Our shoes don't have a midsole, and so we developed a different rubber compound. And when we approached a rubber manufacturer and said, here's the characteristics that we would like to have for our rubber, they said, but that's not how they make running shoes. And we said, yeah, no joke. That's why we want to do it this way, because we want something that lasts. And so our running shoes, or all of our shoes, have the soles have a 5,000-mile warranty, because they're designed to last well, and which is a whole different story than traditional running shoes.
It'd be funny if you deliberately made a shoe that's designed to fall to pieces after a certain amount of time, because you want them to be barefoot anyway.
Yeah, I
you literally wear these till they fall off and then keep going.
Yeah, I appreciate the what's the word, ulterior motive in your idea that supports our concept. I don't think human beings would go for it quite so much. Although if we actually sold it with that was the whole idea. It's like, here's a shoe that will fall apart, and by the time it does, you're going to be ready to go barefoot. Maybe there's a there. That's pretty funny. But we'd have to let them know.
Yeah. Interesting. This is probably not your area, but I do a lot of interviews about the microbiome. So
sure.
I'm thinking about a foot being away from oxygen in a sock, in a shoe, X number of hours a day, or maybe in socks all day, and then being free to the air. I'm sure the microbiome of the foot dramatically changes.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Well, look, let's do it this way. When you're bound up in a shoe all day, that's when people complain that their feet smell. When you're barefoot most of the time, that just doesn't happen very much, if at all. Even in some of our sandals, it's pretty unlikely that you get a bunch of foot stink, because your foot is open to the air and and gets air circulating around it, instead of being cooped up in a hot, warm, moist environment.
How about people that have twisted, tilted toes or hammer toes? Like, do they notice that their toes move over a period of months of wearing your shoes or going barefoot?
Once again, I can't make a generalization or a promise. I am neither a doctor nor do I play one on the internet, TV, or podcasts. All I can say is that there are podiatrists whose part of their business is helping people change their foot shape into something more natural after it's all been cramped up. And they can use toe spreaders and various other things. They also recommend our products. I guess a better way to think of it actually is this. Often what will cause those problems is being in shoes that force your foot into an unnatural position. So if you allow your foot to move into a more natural position and give it the impetus, the stress, the support, the stretching, the whatever else it would need, there are some things that are undeniably reversible, and other things that may not be, depending on the severity of the deformity.
Okay. I mean, again, it's just pure anecdotal, but have you heard from customers saying, my toes move, look at them? And send you pictures like before and after their feet, or is that too weird?
I will say yes, we have gotten those emails.
Okay. Do people send you like pictures of their feet sometimes?
The biggest regret that I have about this business is that I didn't take before and after pictures of my feet, because it didn't occur to me that we were going to be in the shoe business. But the change is dramatic. And I don't know if we've gotten before and afters, because again, most people wouldn't think to take the before. So
that's true.
We may have, but it's not ringing a bell.
Okay. So what's ahead? You said you're growing pretty rapidly. Congrats. That's great. What would you like to have happen in the next year or 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
We would like to have all footwear companies that make things that aren't good for your feet go out of business, and we are left standing. And I'm only being partially glib when I say that. I'm trying to make natural movement the obvious, better, healthy choice, the way natural food currently is. Sometimes I like to joke and say I want to become the gluten-free of footwear, and I also like to say we're creating a movement. So this whole natural movement thing is the real deal. There are CEOs of major footwear companies who have said to friends of ours that they know that what we're doing is legit, and they can't do it because it would be admitting that everything else they've been doing for 40 plus years is complete crap. So I'd be okay if those companies made a change and everyone started wearing shoes that are actually good for your feet. That's really what I want to happen. If we are the prime beneficiaries of that or not, I don't really care about that as much. But I know it sounds hyperbolic to say it, but we're trying to change the world. And ironically, we're just trying to change the world back to the way it was before big companies started making shoes that were bad for your feet. So the problem is that there's just not a lot of people old enough to remember the way it was. Or the American College of Sports Medicine's national conference a year ago, there was a panel discussion about footwear. I was on it. Some guys from Brooks, a guy from Adidas was also on it. And Irene Davis asked a question. I'm paraphrasing. She said, look, in the 60s, we were running in super thin-soled running shoes. We were playing basketball in Chuck Taylors, which are also thin-soled shoes without any support. We weren't getting the kind of injuries, the severity of injuries, or even the number of injuries that we're getting now. So what problem were you trying to solve, and why didn't it work? And they had no answer. And I finally chimed in and said, look, let's just, call a spade a spade. If you look at the design of the modern athletic shoe, and then you look at how feet are made and how feet function, and you look at the research about natural movement, it's impossible to conclude anything other than the design of the modern athetic shoe is simply wrong. And there's a long pause, and the guy from Adidas goes, yeah, but not everyone's going to switch to your shoes right away. I'm going, wow, that's the best you've got? You're right. People won't, but over time, the idea is that people will have the experience of what natural movement can do for them. And, we really are trying to be part of changing the world.
Yeah, I should have asked you this earlier, but one quick question. What about, obviously people sitting, that's a whole problem in itself. What about people that have to stand for long periods of time? Do you ever have customers like that?
Yeah.
And what's their feedback, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I totally love that you're asking all these. Their feedback is that they're able to do that for the first time pain-free.
Really? Wow.
Well, again, your feet are designed to bend and move and flex and feel. If you don't let them do that, that function tries unsuccessfully to move up to your ankle, your knee, your hips, your back. And if you let your feet do their job, then it can take the stress off those other joints. And again, your posture is not misaligned because you don't have an elevated heel, et cetera. So We know of a community that they work in a factory. They're on concrete floors all day long for 8 to 12-hour days. And I think the entire community wears minimalist footwear because they found that it allowed them to be healthy. And they have a doctor in that community who said to me, he said, I can't tell people that the number of injuries, lower extremity injuries that I treat has gone from 40% of the community to 0 because nobody believes me, but that's what's happened.
Are there any sandals you've seen that aren't good? Even though they're sandals, like ones that just go between the big toe, or what's right and wrong about those?
Yeah, all of them. So what's wrong with most I'll start with flip-flops and then we'll do sport sandals. So flip-flops, the problem is that the thong between your toe requires you to keep those on your foot. It requires you to A, kind of jam your foot forward into the thong, which can be uncomfortable. And B, it makes you have to keep that thing on your foot. You end up flexing your toes, like, curling them down at a time in your gait cycle where they actually should be doing the exact opposite. So you're moving your foot in an unnatural position, which can cause problems for people. The second thing is they're almost always made of foam. And again, the foam breaks down unevenly and I was going to say inappropriately. That's not quite right. But when the foam breaks down, that causes problems that can lead to some real structural problems. Just sit around any place where people are walking by in sandals and just look and see how many people are falling off one edge or the other, or it looks like their foot is at some weird angle. We did this a couple of years ago and it was about 90%. So that's the two big problems with flip-flops. The problem with most sports sandals, like Chaco Tevaquin, for example, is that they hold on your foot with a different webbing system similar to the one that we use on our sports sandals. But they tend to be big, thick, stiff bricks with a ton of arch support and a bunch of heel lift. So again, it's not letting your foot do what's natural, and they weigh a ton. That can be problematic. Backing up to the flip-flop, our thong sandals have a lacing system that goes all the way around your ankle and holds across the top of your foot and around your ankle with a design that I patented, but is based on a 10,000-year-old idea. I came up with a strange variation that no one had ever thought of, apparently. And the difference with those compared to a flip-flop is that you don't need to jam your toe into the thong. And because the lacing goes all the way around your foot, it lets your foot continue to move naturally. It's really just like walking barefoot, but someone's throwing a thin piece of rubber on the ground underneath your foot as you make every step. People run ultra marathons in those sandals. You couldn't do that in a way that makes sense in a regular flip-flop.
Have you studied any ancient footwear? From
tons.
1,000+ years ago, and what did you learn from looking at that?
Yeah, it looks a lot like ours. If you look at the 10,000-year-old sagebrush sandals that they pulled out of an archaeological dig in Oregon, they look a lot like our thong-style sandals. If you look at the sandals that the Romans wore, they look a lot like our sport sandals. There's some design elements in our shoes that I carried over from our sandals that, again, you find. There are a couple of footwear museums, one in, I think, Toronto and one in Italy. And people keep sending us photos like, hey, these look just like yours. And it is true.
Well, what might be cool is if you, like in the sandals, parts of the shoe that you can put pictures on or design. If you call one, the Roman sandal, and it looks exactly like a Roman sandal, and another one's like another culture. And you could have, again, the same shoe, but different cultures, it would look like those culture shoes. Be pretty cool.
We absolutely could. The kind of funny thing that I'll say is that we've actually improved on those designs, just because this is backing up to your science versus nature. So those old sandals were made with natural materials, bark, hemp, various things that rubber is way better, frankly, last longer, can be made thinner, can provide more protection with less material, et cetera, more flexible also. So that's one of the places where technology and science has actually improved over history.
Yeah, well, I'm wearing a pair of your Xero shoes, and these straps are on these are like blue and brown and all that. But, it'd be cool to have little symbols of what, let's say, a Roman shoe would look like as a design. True. Or some other kind of shoe.
True.
So it's just, an idea for you for fashion.
Oh, no, I like
fashion
it.
Minimal footwear.
Yeah, the challenge that you just described is that we are not a big company. And so there's lots of things that we would love to do that we just don't have the resources yet to be able to make happen. That's one of one of the challenges with being a bootstrap company where we need to make decisions about what we know is going to sell. We also have minimums. So when we're making a new product, we'll have to make, for example, 4,000 pairs of something. So if we're not confident we can sell 4,000 pairs of that thing compared to the however many thousands of pairs of, say, the black version or the brown version or the blue version, then we can't necessarily do all the cool things that are on our to-do list.
I gotcha. Well, cool. Just for listeners, I don't know, just to disclose, you guys sent me a pair to evaluate, and I love them. And again, it's changed a lot of things for me. So I really appreciate that. And,
no, look, it's our pleasure, of course.
Yeah. And so what's the best way for people to read your blog, buy the shoes, find out more, et cetera? What are some resources for them?
Simple. Just go to xeroshoes.com, xeroshoes.com, or find us on social media, pretty much at Xero Shoes or /Xero Shoes, anywhere you would go.
All right. Well, great. Well, it's been good talking to you. I really appreciate you being here, and thanks for all the good work you're doing.
Oh, no, I really appreciate it.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.